Hey, happy Tuesday, and welcome to episode 8 of Pathfinder. Today we'll be talking with Kevin Weil, who serves as president of product and business at Planet. Kevin cut his consumer social teeth in the early days of Twitter before moving on to Instagram and some other cool projects at Meta. Eventually, though, and most importantly for our purposes, Kevin made the jump to space, imaging satellites and software products to ingest, process, and understand what all of Planet's satellites are seeing. Really happy with the range of this conversation. Can't wait for you to hear it, but first, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Our reliance on satellites for navigation, communications, commerce, and intelligence has grown exponentially in the new space economy. Unfortunately, the risks have grown as well. The need to prioritize cybersecurity around space assets is critical. SpiderOak Mission Systems provides space cybersecurity products for military, commercial, and civilian operators. Their Orbit Secure solution is the first to deliver zero trust security to zero gravity environments, protecting space communication, command, control, data transmission, storage, and integrity at the data level. To learn more about Orbit Secure, check out their website at spideroak-ms.com. Again, that is spideroak-ms.com. Now on to the main business of the day, Pathfinder episode 8 with Kevin Weil.
Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I was just mentioning this before we actually went on air, but we have, in the first 7 episodes of Pathfinder, jumped around a lot, but we haven't actually had a dedicated focus yet on Earth observation, or EO. And just for listeners who aren't familiar, I'll be saying EO a lot this episode, and that's short for Earth observation. And I think it's fitting, Matt, we have the president of Planet come on as our first dedicated EO episode.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm a daily reader of Payload, so we're fans of each other.
That makes me very happy. So why don't you give the quick elevator pitch of Kevin Weil? And we will, of course, get into what you're doing at Planet, but I'm actually a little bit more interested to hear what you were up to before you joined Planet first.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if you go back far enough, I was a physics grad student, thought I was going to be a physics professor for the rest of my life, studying theoretical particle physics. And actually met my wife. I was at Stanford and met my wife, who kind of had grown up within the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Stanford. And I had no idea. I was at Harvard. I'm a year older than Mark. So I was at Harvard when Facebook, took off.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking when Mark went, I went to his sophomore year and then dropped out to go focus on Facebook the whole time. I remember thinking, he's going to give up a Harvard education to go do some company. Like, that's crazy, so yeah. I had total blinders on, like math, physics, nothing else, no concept of like entrepreneurship or anything. So my wife kind of opened my eyes to it, actually. And as I learned more, I was just like, man, that seems awesome. Like, I could do physics and like maybe make a contribution over the next 50 years, maybe, or I can go write some code.
Yeah, yes.
Ship something to 1 million people tomorrow.
That's what I was going to ask about. What would the particle physics track look like? Like, how long would you stay in grad school, post grad, whatever, before, as you say, making an actual impact in that field?
Yeah, it would have been. So I did like 2 years of grad school. I passed my quals. I basically got to the point where it would have turned into total research, and I was spending all my time reading papers and stuff. And it's super interesting. It's just, to make a contribution in theoretical physics is, it's a career long thing. Whereas I feel so lucky. I get to like work on products that hopefully change people's lives day in and day out today. So it just felt so much more tangible.
Right.
So I had grown up programming. My dad was at Microsoft for a long time. So I knew how to program and started working as an engineer, sort of data scientist at some startups that nobody in the audience has ever heard of because they didn't work. But I joined Twitter in 2009 as an engineer, data scientist. The company was about 40 people, just in the early days. And, did my best to make an impact there and got really lucky as the company grew. I had some people that kind of took me under their wing, gave me some opportunities that I, had no real business getting. But I worked as hard as I could and tried to make their bets worth it. So ended up running product at Twitter for a bunch of years, and then moved to Instagram to lead product there, where I got to work with Kevin Systrom, who I still think is the single best consumer product thinker in the world.
What stage at Instagram did you join? Was it owned by Facebook at that point?
It was so Twitter had grown from about 40 people to about 4,000 people, and this
Oh
is
wow.
2016. So I was there from 2009 to 2016. And then Instagram was this amazing opportunity to go back to a company. I think it was maybe 100 or 200 people. So it was within Facebook. Facebook had acquired it, but it was running very separately at that point. I think now they're a bit more integrated, but at that point, Mark really, to his credit, gave Kevin Systrom a ton of autonomy. And I think that was to the benefit of Facebook and Instagram. So it was like moving back to this little, 100, 200 person company with a tiny product team. But Instagram at that point was still reaching an audience of like 300 million users.
Yeah, yeah.
And then got the opportunity to go start what became Libra and DM, ultimately Facebook's crypto efforts. And I'm drawn to like big missions, and that mission was about as big as it gets. The idea was to make sending money to anyone anywhere in the world as easy, as free, as fast as sending a text message. And if you dug into fintech at all, the current state of sending money around the world is just horrific. It's regressive. It's bad in so many ways. And we felt like we could make an impact, and we failed ultimately, but it was a good experience.
Well, the take fees with transmitting money overseas and whatnot and remittances is crazy, right?
They're huge, and they're more expensive the poorer that you are. It takes days. It requires people taking time off their jobs to go and pick up money in a store. Then you have these crazy situations where like people are walking out of these stores and everyone knows that they just picked up money. And so there are physical threats, and we're just like, man, I mean, this should be as simple as sending a WhatsApp message.
Walk us through what the process of joining Planet was like, and what convinced you to sort of make that jump, because that forgive the pun, but I mean that's an unfamiliar space, right?
Absolutely. I mean, a space that I had been a fan of for a long time, and it had been, I found myself. We have a 7-year-old and twin 5-year-olds. I found myself watching every SpaceX rocket launch with my kids, but absolutely very different than what I had been doing. So actually, the connection was through Adam Bain, who was one of my closest friends and mentors since the earliest days of Twitter. He was their CRO and ultimately COO. I wasn't looking, but he said, "Hey, I just met this guy, Will Marshall at Planet. Will's the founder and CEO. You've got to meet him." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I mean, and as I dug in, it's like, okay, this is an opportunity to go talk physics and satellites and sustainability with this ex NASA rocket scientist. Like, why wouldn't I go? Um, and so, the more I learned about Planet, the more I was just like, this is the most interesting company in the world. And I'm a big believer that you kind of follow your gut. Like I found myself waking up every morning thinking about Planet rather than thinking about my day job. And at some point, it's just like, when that happens enough days in a row, you got to go do it.
You got to do it. Yeah, totally. I think doing my due diligence for this conversation, I read or heard somewhere that that the story of basically Will and his co-founders like launching essentially an android in space. Now that's an oversimplification, but that is like it gets to the root of sort of the cubesat smallsat revolution is a lot of miniaturization and the we were talking about smartphones, the economies of scale with smartphone parts and being able to leverage that for actually putting hardware on orbit. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, well, I loved that Planet Planet is where it is because Will and Robbie and Chris, who's the other co-founder, uh, kind of did things differently from the beginning. Like you said, I mean, you really weren't far off. It literally did start with them launching an Android phone into space. They were at NASA and they saw all of these projects getting done that were like, school bus sized satellites that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and took 8 years. And they were like, I think we can do it a different way. And so they literally like strapped a solar panel to the back of an Android phone, launched it into space, found that it could take images of the Earth, and it could even, with its consumer grade radio, send them all the way back down to a ground station. And it kind of this light bulb went off, and it was like we could do this completely differently. We can build orders of magnitude cheaper. We can build faster. We can use more like off the shelf components. And it's to me, coming from a software background, it's a little bit like the world of the 90s when everyone was like, getting bigger and bigger Oracle servers, like who can buy the beefiest Oracle database possible. And then Google came along and said, no, actually, you know what? The world's not about that. You can scale way better if you build software that relies on tons of cheap servers that and you get a huge amount of benefit from the parallelism, and you save a ton of money, and you build more resilient software. That analogy kind of drives me at Planet.
Fast forward to today, Planet's a publicly traded company. You have the largest EO constellation, over 200 satellites if memory serves. But for any listeners who might not be super aware of Planet, and I suspect that that's a very, very minuscule amount of folks who tune into Pathfinder, but can you just give us the quick, 30-second spiel on what Planet is and what Planet does?
Yeah, sure thing. So we talked about the motivation that drove the founders to look at a completely different way of building satellites, and that ultimately showed them that you could build satellites totally differently. So the fact that our satellites, they're tiny, right? They're the size of a shoebox. They weigh about 5 or 6 kilograms. That means they're far cheaper to build, to launch, and we also can iterate on them more quickly because we do everything in-house, totally vertically integrated. So that the end result is, instead of having 3 or 4 satellites, we have a constellation of over 200. The majority of them are in vertical orbit, a sun-synchronous orbit that they're basically going around the world north to south while the world spins west to east, and we line scan the whole planet every single day at about 3 or 4 meter resolution. And what that means, you think of a square about 10 feet on a side, that becomes a pixel, and in the resulting image, we have that over the whole area of the Earth. Now, I'm smaller than a 10-foot square. You're smaller than a 10-foot square. It means we can't distinguish individual people. We can't read license plates. We can't read your newspaper. But we can see how the Earth is changing and how humans are shaping it on a daily basis. So whether you're talking like agriculture or border management or mining or maritime or floods or insurance or commodities or finance, like the data touches just about every industry. And the interesting thing about it is it's ultimately a recurring revenue SaaS business. So we talk about the satellites, but it's a SaaS business. We have over 800 customers. People purchase the data typically on like a square kilometer basis. That's kind of our analog of like a per seat model in a SaaS company. And these are like yearly, multi-year contracts. So it looks more like a business model people understand, but it's almost like, our data centers are our satellites in space.
Yeah. I've said before that Planet very much feels like a typical Silicon Valley company. You talk a lot about ARR, annual recurring revenue, and SaaS and whatnot. You just happen to also have satellites to be scanning the entire planet every day.
Exactly.
What, if any, like lessons from the consumer social playbook or best practice? I hate that term, but for lack of a better term, best practices, if any, did you take from consumer social over to running product at Planet?
Well, I think the thing that transfers, whether you're talking about building a consumer product or an enterprise product, space, social networks, it's a focus on the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get close to our customers, understand the problems that they have, not just what they tell you the problems are, but what's the underlying thing there. And the better you can understand that, the more crisply you can articulate how you're solving that problem for them, and the more that you can build kind of a cohesive product that fits into the way that they operate on a daily basis. So that's I'm obviously, Planet didn't hire me because I know what I'm doing in terms of building satellites.
Yeah.
Because I don't, and we have amazing people on the team that are world leading in that. But the opportunity to build a fantastic software platform around this data is one of the most exciting things that I see.
Let's zoom out a little bit to the EO industry writ large. Where would you characterize along, the maturity scale, or just how grown up is EO? And then the follow on to that is how would you characterize Planet's position within that field? Because and this will be an opportunity to let you talk your book a little bit as you were preparing to go public, and in investor materials about the the flywheel starting to spin in terms of the constellation size, the data, everything. But I'll let you talk about it, not me.
Sure. Well, let me take the first one on the EO industry. The interesting thing about this is the answer is across the board. So you've got folks like governments, right? Especially the U.S. government. They are extremely sophisticated. They've been doing this for years. But for them, they got their start launching their own satellites, which they still do, of course, a lot. And so what's new for the government side is the opportunity to work with commercial companies like Planet, where the data is unclassified, and there's a whole host of interesting implications that we can talk about from that. And there are industries like agriculture that, at least when you're talking about the big ag companies who are all customers of ours, they're also very sophisticated about remote sensing data. Whether you're talking Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, they know what they're doing, and they would love.
They have in-house data scientists that know how to process and ingest all this.
Exactly. No, they definitely do. And I think we have an opportunity with a lot of those customers to take some of the heavy lifting off of their plates to allow them to do more of the differentiated work that they can do. But they really know what they're doing. And then you have a lot of industries that are just coming up the curve, whether you're talking like energy or insurance or finance, everything that's sustainability oriented, which is kind of like a layer across all the industries we serve. Um, all of these industries need the ground truth that Planet can have. They benefit from understanding how the world is changing on a daily basis in different ways. You can't manage what you can't measure. So the data is critical. But if you drop a terabyte of pixels onto some of these companies, it's not that they can immediately get value from it. So a lot of our work going forward is how we simplify that for them, how we make it easier for them to extract the signal from the noise to get at what matters to them versus having to start from pixels in every case.
Moving up the stack, right?
Exactly.
Right. So actually, I'm glad that you got a little bit into industry. So if my memory is correct, I think it might not actually have been, it was 2 quarters ago, but you had around 51% your sales were to government, and so that includes both military and civil space. When do you think? I mean, that's pretty close though, because of course a lot of your peers or counterparts, I suppose, in EO, the concentration, there are very, very few commercial sales, if at all. When do you think that the flippening will happen, or will it happen in terms of just the majority of the customer base being commercial entities?
Well, I think
'Cause you're really close.
you're totally right. I think it's one of the areas where Planet stands apart in that we heavily serve both governments and commercial businesses. Um, I'm proud to do both, by the way. The world is a dangerous place. I'm very, very proud to serve our government and allied governments around the world. But I'm also really excited to see what happens as the commercial industries kind of come up the curve on understanding how to get value out of the data. Because it's not just relevant to governments, it's relevant to agriculture and insurance and finance and sustainability and climate and supply chains and anything you can think of. So I think in the long run, the size, there's so many more of those companies. They will be the majority of the EO business in general.
Yeah, sort of a turnkey approach. But to what extent do you think in your in day-to-day product at Planet and just overall corporate strategy with the specific industry verticals that you're going after? And what are most of them a market push, and that you have to sort of educate and explain and walk through your new potential customers why this would be of value to them, just because they have no sort of precedent? As you manage, governments have been launching, owning, operating their own imaging, remote sensing satellites for decades. And so it's more of a familiar space for them. Whereas a lot of these industries, and I know I've seen Planet talk about this, but why don't you walk our audience through that and just this element of push versus pull, and what of the industries that you've already mentioned, which ones are more sort of now kind of, getting up to speed, and which ones you're still trying actively kind of marketing to hiring sales staff to sell into?
Yeah, it's honestly a mix. We're still a small company, so we're hiring sales across the board and in just about every region of the world. We talked as we were going public about the fact that we had just a handful of people in Latin America, for example. And if you've only got a handful of people, they're each covering multiple countries. We couldn't handle all the inbound that's coming at them. And so part of scaling our business is just uh, growing our sales teams to handle the demand that we're seeing. So there is a bunch of pull from the market. When you get into industry by industry, these are industries are not one thing, right? So some industries, most of the companies that we work with, agriculture is an example, most of the companies that we work with, at least above a certain size, have experts on staff. They know what to do. And it's a matter of making sure that this is the most cost effective way to do what they're trying to do, to solve their problems. You get into other industries and you might have a company that is investing, is leaning in, gets that there's something here, and then you have a bunch of other companies in their space that are following along behind that are going to fast follow once they see some success in one area. And we're excited when you have those industries. We're excited to go and work with the ones that are leaning into innovation and that are willing to invest with us and co-create something. We find that super exciting.
And you have a one, quote unquote, one to many model. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, and it gets a little bit at your question, which I don't know if I ever came back to, about how Planet is differentiated from the rest of the industry. So one thing I didn't talk about when I was kind of introing Planet is the fact we actually operate a second constellation today. It's not just the ones that scan the whole Earth at 3 to 4 meter resolution. We also operate a high res constellation of satellites. We have 21 satellites that, rather than imaging at 3 to 4 meters resolution, they image at about 50 centimeter resolution. But instead of passively scanning, they're tasked. So a customer comes in, uses our API, writes a Python script, comes to the UI and says, "I want an image of this particular location at about this particular time," and we make that work. That is actually the model that most of our competitors do. There are most of the satellite industry and most of the history of the satellite industry is high resolution tasking. And that's a harder model to make one to many because by definition, your satellites are tasking what one customer wanted most often. And there are ways to make it more one to many. And we think about that as well. You have an archive that you can take advantage of. You have customers that are, lots of times multiple customers are interested in one area, things like that. But it's really our medium res, the scan of the whole Earth, that is the basis of our one to many model and is one of the reasons that our cost structure and margin structure looks so different than every other business in our industry. Because in that case, like, the sunk cost is up front, right? We passively scan the whole Earth every day, and each customer that we sell to incrementally, the marginal cost is near zero. So you take a particular patch of farmland somewhere. They're part of a subscription, say, for a large ag enterprise that supports the farmer that manages the farmland. They're also part of a subscription for potentially a competitor who's looking at doing some competitive analysis. They're part of the subscription for NASA, who's studying sustainability. They're part of the subscription for an insurance company who's using the data to track soil water content and monitor drought to improve their risk models. They're part of the subscription for a state government studying crop yields, for a hedge fund assessing commodities, and on and on and on, right? And that's the root of the one to many.
Right. Switching gears to, as I mentioned already, you're a publicly traded company. I think the SPAC was consummated in December, late December, early January.
Late December, or no, sometime in December, mid-December, I think.
Yeah. December. That's good. That's good enough for our purposes. Walk through the pressures, but also opportunities of being a publicly traded company. Right. This is really new for pure play space companies. Of course, there's been a lot of legacy contractors that have, sizable space divisions that have been publicly traded for a long time. But over the past 18 months and change, there's been all these companies that have gone through the gates, almost always through a SPAC, special purpose acquisition.
Yep.
Talk about that. And actually from a product lens, I'm sure that you are not watching the stock price day to day and stressing over that and it's heads down building. But want to hear a little bit more about what that experience has been like, because it is still relatively fresh and new.
Yeah, I won't speak to other companies, but from our perspective, as we went public, we tried to treat it like any other public offering. So I was on the management team through Twitter's IPO. Our CFO, Ashley, has been on the inside of IPOs in her career as well. So we kind of knew what to expect. And our goal was to be really thoughtful about how we set expectations for future growth. And in a way that maybe not everybody was.
And I'm just going to help you out. You made like 100 million last year, something along those lines. A lot of these other companies are pre-revenue. Not to name, I'm not going to name names or anything, but
yeah. So we were a more mature business, which certainly helped us in terms of being able to set thoughtful projections. Our growth is accelerating. We talked about that. We've been delivering on that. And at the end of the day, we have a proven business model it's a recurring revenue model. We have a structure, this one-to-many model that we were just talking about, that sets us up for strong margins. And at the end of the day, we had strong interest in the pipe. We had very low redemptions.
Yeah.
So we raised almost $600 million from our public offering, and that sets us up really well going forward.
The redemption rate, I'll just double click on that because it was exceptionally low, like 2%. And for those who are not aware, that's just essentially investors who put their money into the blank check company that once they find out who the target acquisition company, I'm probably butchering this a little bit, but basically those who opts to just get their money back rather than invest in the company that is merging with the SPAC. And it was 2%, right?
Yeah, it was something about, I think, a little bit under that.
That's pretty remarkable because at least even in January and February where these transactions were still happening, it was like the opposite. It was like 98%. Maybe not that high, but it was pretty crazy. But we don't have to dwell on the publicly traded or public company part of this, but I do want to ask, and again, you don't have to speak for other space companies, but it's been a bumpy road for space SPACs, I think I'd say. And some investors recently have been talking about the performance of SPACs. And I will say, I you have pointed out that it's not necessarily fair to just lump them all into one category, but I'm going to do it for the purposes of this question. Do you think that the turbulence with space SPACs will have a chilling effect on funding for future space companies? Does that worry you at all?
Well, turbulence with space SPACs, I would argue it's turbulence with SPACs in general, and frankly, the entire public market in general.
Yeah, and growth companies especially
growth companies, regardless of how they went public. Look, I mean, I hope not. One of the reasons that I joined Planet was I think this next decade is the decade where space just becomes a part of our everyday lives, whether that's SpaceX launching rockets or consumers and businesses and governments everywhere beginning to use Earth observation, remote sensing data to inform their decisions, and a whole host of things that are kind of further out. I sure hope people continue to invest in space because I think it changes the world.
Okay, time for a short break to hear about our sponsors again. Space is the new frontier for cybersecurity. SpiderOak Mission Systems builds space cybersecurity solutions for civilian, military, and commercial space operations. The Orbit Secure protocol delivers zero trust security to zero gravity environments, protecting space communication, command, control, data transmission, storage, and integrity at the data level. To learn more about how zero trust architectures will revolutionize security in new space, download the new NSR SpiderOak sponsored white paper titled Space Cybersecurity, Current State and Future Needs. You can find that white paper at spacecyber.com. Again, that's spacecyber.com, or check out their website at spideroak-ms.com and tell them Pathfinder sent you.
We are going to move on now. Deep sigh of relief from talking about the markets and get into just the sort of stack, if you will, with EO in particular. I believe I've heard you talk about, I hear a lot of commentators shout out Arvin, Joe Morrison, talk about sort of the difference between data, analytics, insights. Can you unpack that a bit for our listeners who might not be as familiar with those different parts of the value chain?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about the life cycle of, say, an image that's taken by one of our PlanetScope satellites, a 3 to 4 meter image over a particular area of the Earth, the satellites coming over. So our satellites are in an orbit such that basically every day at about 10:30 in the morning, that's when they take their scan. So it's 10:30 in the morning local time at every locale in the world. And the reason that's important is because you get things like consistency of where shadows are, which allows you to better run machine learning and other kinds of algorithms over the data without having extra noise from like shadows moving around. But as the data, so the satellite passes over a ground station, it downlinks the data that it's taken. There's a processing step where the data gets all stitched together, and then ultimately a customer, maybe it's a farmer walking their field, has an image of their area that same day. And the most basic thing is you could just be looking at the pixels, right? And you could be doing that either as a human looking at pixels with your eyeballs, which works over small areas, but obviously there aren't enough humans and enough eyeballs to look at the entire area of the Earth. Or you can be a computer running an algorithm scanning the imagery to do some sort of analysis on it. And we could, as a business, choose to just stop there. And then anybody who wanted insights or anything on top of it would have to start at the level of the pixels and do all the work themselves. And what we see is that a lot of customers and a lot of partners just don't, they don't have people on their staff that know how to deal with huge volumes of pixels. It's geospatial analysis is still a pretty specialized field. And so either, from our perspective, the best thing that we can do, and this is us, it's partners, is to start building out some of the building blocks that if you look across all the partners and customers that we serve, a lot of them are having to do the same things over and over again. And we would rather take that undifferentiated kind of heavy lifting from them and give them a higher level product that they can build off of. And then once you're to that point, you can do the same analysis again. What is everyone having to build that they kind of wish they didn't have to build because their goals are more differentiated? And so for us, it's the more that we can build some of these building blocks, the more customers and partners we can actually bring into the space, because rather than having like geospatial experts on staff, maybe they just need somebody who knows how to write a Python script or somebody that knows how to manage an Excel spreadsheet or a time series, right? So you increase your potential market size, you bring more people into the space, you increase your impact. So I'll give you one example, actually. We acquired a company recently called VanderSat, which is based.
Planetary Variables.
Yep, which is based in.
You read my mind.
Well, it's a perfect example of this. I talk sort of abstractly about why we want to do this, but let me give you a real example.
That's what I was going to ask about. That was coming next.
VanderSat is a company based in the Netherlands, and they take optical data like what Planet or Sentinel produces, and they take microwave data from other satellites, sometimes even SAR data, which is a different kind of radar-based data set, also from satellites. They fuse them all together, and the collection is more powerful than the sum of the parts. So they produce these products on top of this data fusion that do things like land surface temperature, soil water content, carbon biomass, and they serve a number of insurance customers, for example, also a bunch of agricultural customers. But one of their insurance customers, a big reinsurer, they take the soil water content data, which is just literally like how much water is there in the soil over any particular area. And you can look at that going backwards in time, and you can develop a risk model for how this varies over time with different seasons, drought, amounts of rainfall. And you can actually build an insurance product for farmers using it. And then you can look at the data going forward in time and determine automatically whether you need to pay out a farmer for this drought insurance product. And that's an easy product to build. I shouldn't say easy, but it's a possible product. It leverages the skills that this reinsurer has in pricing and risk methodologies and everything to build on top of this soil water content product. If instead we had not had this and we're like, here's a whole bunch of pixels, you go grab all this data, you do the data fusion, like it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Have fun. Have at it.
So it's an example of how building up the stack and making these products easier to use, making the data more accessible, ultimately brings in a whole bunch more customers, and it moves the space forward.
Switching gears to Ukraine. Let's talk a little bit about Ukraine. Obviously, Planet Imagery has played a large role in, I would say, just the public and the media and just the world's understanding of what's going on there. And I find myself checking your gallery almost on a daily basis still, 150 plus days into the war. And just the other week, we're recording on July 13th. It was a week or two ago, but there you had a photo of Snake Island, and there was that struggle between Russians and Ukrainians. The latter were taking back Snake Island, and it was just so crazy because someone in Austin, someone I don't know in Australia, in Africa can see what's going on, and it's really I mean of course this imagery has been pretty important in a lot of ways in showing that the emperor has no clothes, and just that a lot of the Russian claims about what's going on the ground are just lies. So, but want to hear from you about that and what the experience has been like, being a critical provider of imagery, intelligence, whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, maybe before I start, I should just say the war in Ukraine is just a horrible, horrible situation. But one of the nice things about being at Planet is at least we feel like we can help, and we help in a bunch of ways, and it's actually kind of indicative of a bunch of the differentiators between Planet and the other companies in our industry that we've talked about, and the value of having this daily scan of the Earth.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier in the podcast some of the certainly a lot of the world's most advanced governments, the U.S. very much included, they have their own satellites, and I have no details. I'm sure they're using those satellites to help Ukraine as well. But the interesting thing about that is, those satellites, by and large, are highly top secret.
Yeah, that imagery is not getting seen by that many eyeballs.
Yeah, they don't. Putting that imagery out there would show our adversaries and others the capabilities that the government has, and they'd obviously rather not have that happen. And so, actually, governments it's been a really interesting time where governments, I think, have been seeing the value of commercial imagery because our data is out there. Like, we take a daily scan of the world, and transparency is one of our core values at Planet. So, one example, and so the governments can actually just point to our data to say, this happened. You don't have to take our word for it. You can go look at this imagery. This happened. And one example of that was it was in the buildup to the war. It was before the war had actually started, but you had Russian troops amassing on the border between Russia and Ukraine. And one day Putin said, no, I'm going to pull back. And some of his soldiers in this area that he was referencing pulled back, but at the same time, some other soldiers went and built this pontoon bridge over a body of water from Belarus into Ukraine, and and governments around the world were able to point at Planet data and say, he's lying. Look what just happened. And there's a real value in that transparency. But the thing I was going to say, it's really not just security. That's a big part of the way that we can contribute to helping in Ukraine. But one of the second order effects of the war that's just beginning to be written about is the coming food crisis, because Ukraine is the world's, I think, 5th largest exporter of wheat. And so, we're working with governments and NGOs around the world to understand that, to map where it's happening, like what crops are being planted and where, what is the yield going to look like, and just ultimately to kind of get ahead of it, because the more that we can get ahead of it as a society, the more that we can prevent food crises in neighboring countries that are normally dependent on Ukraine. NASA in particular is doing some incredible work on this front, and the New York Times just recently wrote about it. But then there are other angles too, right? You can look at there are a number of NGOs and multilateral organizations that are using planet data as a source of ground truth, one among many in this case, to determine whether war crimes may have been committed. So they're looking at things like intentional destruction of civilian buildings, destruction or theft of like non-combatant food supplies like grain silos, mass graves. And we are certainly not the only data set. There's all TikTok and Instagram are also relevant data sets because you combine Earth observation data with what's happening on the ground to put together a full story. But these are important analyses that these NGOs and multilaterals are doing. And it's just like planet data contributes to all of these things.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a remark. I mean, I want to just underscore too that not glossing. It's tragic. It's horrific, but it's been crazy to see, along with NGOs and international institutions, amateur sleuths. And I in no way mean that as a disparagement when I say amateur, but just these OSINT open source researchers using combination of your imagery and, as you said, UGC user generated content platforms to just track what's going on. It's crazy. It's like a internet totally declassified intelligence agency. But the flip side or corollary to that is that you can't believe everything. So you got to do your own research and diligence. But it is certainly the case that these online researchers have uncovered pretty remarkable things, and there's a database of Russian equipment and vehicles that have been destroyed that uses all of these sources.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a couple of examples on that front, a couple years ago, some Buzzfeed researchers were looking around in Northwest China, I think using Baidu Maps, right? Baidu is the Google of China. And they found that when they zoomed into a certain level of resolution, the map tiles would go blank. And they were like, what's going on here? So they went and they looked at planet data. And the nice thing about satellites, they kind of act like international waters. Like we don't have to remove anything for anybody from our daily scan of the Earth. So they zoomed in on the same areas with planet, and lo and behold, there were Uyghur camps there. And the interesting thing, another absolutely horrible thing, but they could look not just at the state of the camps today, but because we have a daily scan of the Earth, they could go back day on day and look at how these things have been constructed, how fast, what does it look like as they're being built, and then you can use computer vision, AI, and go and look for other instances and see where these things might be being built now. And so again, like this kind of open source intelligence, the transparency just creates a ton of value. I think it could be very, very good for the world.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You can't do anything macroscopic in the world anymore and expect to be able to hide it. And,
right.
That's a pretty fundamental shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you worry at all about, I mean, maybe you personally, but also your employees who are working a lot with this sorts of data that's very clearly, it goes without saying, driving like real world positive change, but just the effects that they could have on their mental health, because it is, it's a lot of these are of course, atrocities and very jarring, I think I'd say. And maybe it's not, you're looking from a satellite, it's not the same thing as like seeing a video on the ground, like in situ, to use a space term. But do you worry about that at all? Or is the kind of effect, knowing that the validation of making like a difference, does that sort of outweigh the more traumatic parts of dealing with that data and imagery?
Well, I think there's a pretty sharp distinction. I've probably the companies I've worked with in the past have been closer to a lot of that, where you're looking at horrible gore and other kinds of content that people post to social media, and you have people that
the content moderation,
that are doing content moderation. Like that's my heart goes out to those people. It's such a hard job, and it's absolutely necessary, but it's such a hard job.
It is, yeah.
We have less of that at Planet because you're, again, 10-foot square turns into 1 pixel. The other difference I would say is we as a company aren't, when you get into like individual use cases, we work with partners that are working with customers to go into like the real, areas of expertise. We couldn't possibly have every expertise that every customer across the world wants. And so partners are a huge part of our business. And so when you get into some of the real nitty gritty stuff, it's not usually Planet employees digging in and looking at it. It's usually partners who are experts in the space, bringing in third parties and NGOs and others to weigh in with expertise. So there's a few differences, but at the same time, I mean, it's serious, and the world is a dangerous place. I think you kind of have to just believe that the net effect that Planet can bring in bringing transparency is a massive positive, even if sometimes that means you capture some of the bad things that happen in the world.
Yeah, yeah. On the inverse, on the flip side of that, I suppose, I asked Twitter earlier today, asked our followers, payload followers, if anyone had any questions. So one person asked, and I'm kind of familiar with the protocol here, but would love for you to walk through Pathfinder listeners what safeguards that you put in place to prevent misuse of your data.
It's a fantastic question, and actually, it's one of as I was talking to Will and Robbie, the founders, about joining, I asked a lot about that. I've been extremely impressed by the processes that Planet has in place. We have an ethics committee that has real teeth. That basically anybody at the company can kind of call stop the line, like, hey, something doesn't feel right here. Certain deals with certain sensitivities will automatically go to the ethics committee. And they've had this committee in place since before we even had an imagery product. So it was something that Will and Robbie and the other early employees had from the beginning. So it's sort of a core part of our view of the world. It's we believe in transparency. We believe in the ability of this data to do good, and we think deeply about how the areas where it can be misused. Sometimes that means building certain provisions into contracts that say the data can be used this way and not that way, with an ability to, cancel contracts if the data is being misused. It also sometimes means just walking away from contracts. And believe me, I have seen the ethics committee has teeth. I've seen us walk away from large contracts before.
Yeah. And I mean, this is conversation for another day. It could be its own podcast or book for that matter, but like the geopolitics of all this in ITAR. But it goes without saying you're not selling to, I don't know, like the mullahs of Iran or North Korea.
I mean, certainly we don't sell from the beginning. Of course, there's no sales to somebody who's on a sanctions list, right? That's out to begin with, and then but then we apply further standards.
Right. So okay, so we're gonna move on from the tough stuff to a little bit lighter stuff to close out the show. And this is actually the second question from Twitter. It's from Arvin, who I know you've been on his podcast. Where did I put it on my list? Essentially, I don't have it in front of me, but he said basically something along the lines of what's one thing that you wish could happen to the Earth observation industry overnight.
Oh, so I get to snap my fingers and just, something changes overnight?
Yes. Genie in a bottle.
I love it. I'll say awareness, because I think, I'm a nerd. I like read math and physics books in my spare time, and I barely knew about this industry beforehand. I think most of the world has no clue that this industry exists, and it's relatively new, so that's understandable. But the data and the impact coming from Planet and the rest of the Earth observation industry could be 100 times what it is if there was more awareness. And now we have to do work on our side too, right? We've got to make the data easier. We've got to make it, more straightforward and automatic to integrate into people's workflows, all these other things. But awareness is first and foremost. And if I could snap my fingers and just have everybody aware of the capabilities that we have today as humanity, in terms of what we know about the Earth and how it changes on a daily basis, I think, again, we could accelerate the good that we do in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think you and me both, right? I mean, everyone that's in space in some way, shape, or form. And again, Arvin's getting tons of shout outs on this podcast, but he has this theory that the amount of attention or headlines, that a certain segment of the space industry gets is inversely correlated with its actual value, whether that's monetary or more intangible value. And so the canonical example here, of course, is space tourism. I think that a lot of the public just thinks that that's mainly what the space industry is doing, right? That's the North Star, is just sending billionaires to space. And yeah, I mean, it is. I completely agree that it's a travesty that more of the public thinks that, and then doesn't know about Planet. And that's definitely probably changing now with your imagery like splayed across the top fold of the New York Times or on the main article online. But it's still. I mean, I don't know if there. I think there have maybe been some surveys, but I'm pretty confident if you ran surveys, at least in the U.S., like more people would make the association between the space tourism, where in reality, of course, Earth observation is an order of magnitude bigger industry and driving all these like positive social changes. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's important.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I joined Planet, you know, instead of other companies in the industry, all of whom I think are doing amazing things, as we talked about. We're both huge fans of the space industry in general, but Planet's mission is to use space to help life on Earth. And we need to do a lot outside of Earth for sure, but we have problems here on Earth today. And Planet is one of the companies I think that has the biggest opportunity to make a real positive impact on that front. And it's why I wanted to work here. It's why I'm inspired to come to work every single day.
Yeah, totally. I think that makes a lot of sense. Space to Earth. There's cool shit too though happening in space to space. Shout out obviously this week. All the web imagery. That's been really cool. That has also been positive, I think, for perception. Like it was all over the place yesterday. A bunch of my friends were talking about it who are not space geeks whatsoever and not affiliated in any way with space. So that was cool to see. I actually didn't plan to ask this, but I think you're probably the best person that I've talked to on the podcast so I could ask to. Do you think in the next decade that a lot of people will follow in your footsteps from big tech, broadly defined, into new space?
I hope so. I mean, and I will say I have had nothing but positive experiences at the big tech companies that I worked with. I'm proud of the work that I did. I worked with amazing people. Every single person that I worked with was there because they believed that they could do good. The world is, of course, a lot more gray than we probably realized in the early days of building social media. But still, like, no regrets. I worked with amazing people. But I do think you're seeing now a lot of those kinds of folks realizing that there are other ways that they can make an impact. So you're seeing them go into climate and sustainability. You're seeing them go into some of these space industry, healthcare. Like I think there's a
Deep
real,
tech verticals. Yeah.
yeah, deep tech. There's just a real sense of like, let's try and there's a whole bunch of areas of the world that we could be doing a lot better in. Let's go try and make some impact in those areas. Space is absolutely one of those. I would love to see more of a migration.
Yeah, and the insinuation, or there was no sort of insinuation there that like those companies. I was more asking from a place of like they're at like the end of history, to use like the Francis Fukuyama term, and just in terms of they're really really mature organizations, along the S curve, whereas space is just starting to take off. Again, forget the pun, but yeah, I hope so too, and I think that it will be interesting to watch. And I've talked about this with prior guests, but because of the prevalence of software and just like a lot of these skill sets are complementary, if not overlapping. So I think that increasingly you'll see, there could like companies like yourself and a lot of the other companies in Silicon Valley, whether it's consumer or B2B and SaaS, like they're all competing for the same talent.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the companies in our space, they're focused heavily on building satellites. And one of the other areas where migration from the big tech companies can help is I think the way that we're going to win is by being amazing on the satellite and the hardware side, of course, but also by building incredible products that are simple to use. And the companies that are going to do best are going to be the ones that can marry both of those things. And folks, I think Planet is the best at that, and I intend to help us keep getting better and better at that every single day. And but we all like that's one of the places that the big tech companies have set themselves apart. So more of that expertise entering our space is only good.
Mm-hmm. Glad we hit on that. To round out the show here, we're going to just do a couple rapid fire questions, or as our producer Courtney likes to call it, rocket fire questions. She just always mispronounces it. But so you can, optical, but also other modalities. You could see, I'm using that word loosely, but you could see like cows farting in space. You could see fires from space, and we've talked about a lot of other things. You can detect tax evasion from space, basically, and it'd take me a couple minutes to explain what I mean there. But what's like the craziest thing that you yourself have uncovered in the past few years while working at Planet about just something that you could detect from space or see from space that you just would never have thought of in your wildest dreams or nightmares?
One of the this is a partial answer to your question, I guess, but one of the things that struck me, and you mentioned the Planet's gallery. You can go to it. It's planet.com/gallery. Is just
I'll
you
put it in
get
the
a
show notes.
sense of cool. You get a sense of how rich and varied the world actually is when you look at it from above, and you get to look at the entire expanse of the world, from deserts to tropical rainforests to coral reefs to Antarctica to everything you can imagine, and frankly, a lot of things that I could have never imagined. And you see this from the view of a satellite. It's a little bit like the view from the space station. You realize like there are no boundaries on these things. There aren't state lines and country lines. Like it's just this incredible world that we live in, and it really, at least for me, I'm a big sustainability person. I've served on the board of the Nature Conservancy for a while, but for me, at least, it really hits home when you look at it through a satellite in a way that it doesn't in your daily life, or
Yeah.
I don't know. So that has really resonated with me, and it's changed the way I think about conservation and climate and everything else.
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of your images are stunning, and I think Ryder, shout out to Ryder, who writes the Planet Snapshots newsletter, does a good job of curating and highlighting those. So I'll also put that show notes.
Yeah, please do. Planet Snapshots. That newsletter is fascinating every week, and
It's great.
good sense of humor too.
Yeah, no, I've been loving it. Second rapid fire question: what is your hottest take about the future of space?
Hottest take about the future of space.
It's a really open-ended question.
That well, I think with space, I don't know how hot of a take this is. I think the old Bill Gates quote about you underestimate what you can do you overestimate what you can do in a year, but you underestimate what you can do in 10 years is absolutely true. I heard stories about Planet's early days when the only launches they could get their satellites up in were government launches from various governments around the world that were really keyed off of like science experiments that the government was doing. And when those science experiments were late, they of course delayed the launch for them. And so Planet's just sitting there going like, well, I wanted to launch those satellites, but I guess we'll wait with you. There was just nothing, right? So versus today, you've got like it's almost ho hum when SpaceX lands a rocket back on a pad. It gives me goosebumps every time, but it's just like you expect it at this point. So we've come there. That's less than 10 years. So just imagine what the next 10 years are going to hold. I will say, I hope this isn't too hot of a take, but I also would love to see more tech companies working with the government. It's the history of Silicon Valley. It's a big part of the reason, of the U.S.'s, historical sort of progress. And I think it's fundamentally deeply important. And I would love to see the sort of prevailing wisdom on that change, to see more government and tech collaboration across the board. And I think the tech industry needs to change on that front.
Yeah. For more on that, I would refer listeners back to a prior episode a few weeks ago we did with A16Z's Kevin Weil, who talked quite a bit about that. Yeah. Last question, and I'm not asking you to rely on any insider info. You probably don't have any insider info because it's been a while since you've been at Twitter, but I just want you to make a quick prediction. Do you think that Elon, and this ties together space and Twitter, so do you think that Elon will end up owning Twitter?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I definitely don't have any insider information.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No one knows what's going on there.
It seems like probably not at this point if he doesn't want to own it. The world where you force this thing onto him when he doesn't want it is not a great outcome for Twitter and not a great outcome for him. And that seems just bad all around. At the same time, I don't think it's great from a governance and rule of law standpoint for people to just like arbitrarily mess with contract law. So there should probably be some real penalties. And I have no idea what the future holds. The only thing I know about Twitter is that it is full of interesting drama. It was full of interesting drama when I was there, and that hasn't stopped, and continues to this day with this episode. So I think it's an important service. I think the world is poorer without Twitter. So I hope that wherever it resolves in a way that they can continue forward ambitiously.
Yeah. From particle physics to contract law. There you have it, folks. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of Payload, so this has been a lot of fun.
Okay, that will do it for Pathfinder episode 0008. Thanks to Kevin for coming onto the show to talk all things EO. Shout out to Spider Open Mission Systems for sponsoring. And finally, a huge shout out to all of you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, leave us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to this. And if you have any other feedback, you can reach out to me directly at ryan@payloadspace.com. I am Ryan Duffy signing off, and I will see you back here next week.